Heeman is a 33-year-old corporate manager who has spent years working himself to exhaustion. Despite his impressive career, the company treats him like a personal servant, constantly dumping impossible tasks and endless overtime on him. One evening, while riding an overcrowded subway, after another brutal day at work, Heeman notices something strange. An empty seat. Seeing it as a rare miracle, he immediately takes it and finally allows himself to rest. Exhaustion quickly overwhelms him, and he falls asleep. When Heeman wakes up, the subway is gone. Instead, he finds himself sitting on a massive stone throne inside a mysterious cave, surrounded by dozens of green goblins. Even more strangely, the goblins are kneeling before him and celebrating his arrival, as if their long-lost lord has finally returned. Heeman initially assumes he's dreaming, but everything feels far too real. The creatures even speak flawless Korean, making the situation even more confusing. Then a goblin child approaches him and offers a strange, spiky fruit. Heeman has no idea what it is, but after his empty stomach growls loudly, he decides to eat it. The moment he takes a bite, the goblins erupt into celebration. But Heeman suddenly collapses, as intense pain spreads through his body. Just when he thinks the fruit has poisoned him, a glowing holographic panel appears before his eyes. A system has finally appeared. It identifies Heeman as the lord of the territory and informs him that territory combat is about to begin. The system explains that territory combat is an all-out war where a lord must protect his territory and its inhabitants using every available resource. Heeman quickly demands to know where he is. The answer leaves him speechless. He is in the demon realm. He then asks how he can return home, but the system repeatedly gives the same response. His territory level is too low to provide that information. Frustrated, Heeman initially thinks this might still be an incredibly realistic dream. But after pinching himself and feeling the pain, he realizes the horrifying truth. This world is real. He has somehow become the lord of a territory in the demon realm, and in only 4 days he must fight a war. Heeman then takes a closer look at the goblins around him. What he sees is far worse than he expected. The goblins are severely malnourished. Some are so skinny that their ribs are clearly visible, while others can barely stand. These aren't some powerful fantasy warriors. They are starving survivors. Heeman immediately understands the situation. He has been given an army that can barely survive, yet the system expects him to lead them into battle. When he asks what happens if he loses, the system gives him an even more terrifying answer. The probability of death is extremely high. Nearly every defeated lord dies. For a moment, Heeman can only laugh at the absurdity of his situation. After spending his entire previous life dealing with impossible corporate assignments, he has somehow been given an even worse job. But then he asks one question that changes everything. If he survives and raises his territory's level, can he return to his original world? The system confirms that returning home is possible. That's all Heeman needs to hear. He immediately stops complaining and begins thinking like the manager he once was. He has only 4 days before the battle, but he refuses to waste them. Heeman steps down from the throne and looks across the territory. The starving goblins quietly follow him, waiting for their new lord's first command. Instead of panicking, Heeman begins studying the situation and searching for a way to turn his weak territory into something capable of surviving the coming war. After all, he has already survived impossible deadlines, endless overtime, and a workplace that constantly demanded miracles. Now he has 4 days to perform another one, and this time failure means death. Goblins stare in confusion when Heeman announces that everyone will be working overtime. The cave quickly transforms from a throne room into a military construction site. Heeman studies the narrow cave entrance and realizes it can serve as a natural bottleneck, forcing a larger enemy army into a confined space. When he asks the goblins for defensive ideas, they have nothing useful to offer, making it clear that he must teach them everything from scratch. He explains that their survival depends on defending the passage. Rolling up his sleeves, Heeman selects 10 goblins to collect tree trunks from the mountain. Another 15 are ordered to gather rocks and stack them along the canyon's edge. The remaining goblins dig defensive trenches with their bare hands, while Heeman works alongside them. Hours pass, and night falls beneath the light of 2 enormous moons. By then, the battlefield has been transformed. Huge boulders line the canyon, sharpened wooden stakes cover the entrance, and a massive pit trap containing a wooden spear has been prepared in the center. The exhausted goblins are covered in dirt, with cracked and bleeding fingers. Just then, the floating system activates the overtime skill, restoring much of their lost energy. Heeman praises their work, but explains that overtime means using the hours when their enemies are sleeping to prepare the battlefield. Every drop of sweat improves their chances of survival. He gives them a 3-second battle cry before ordering them to form a battle line. The result is complete chaos. Goblins crash into each other, trip over rocks, and shove their own teammates. Their weapons are equally poor, consisting mostly of sharp stones and rusty knives. Since their enemy is another goblin tribe, Haman assumes they probably lack powerful weapons too. Strategy will have to defeat numbers. Remembering a lesson from his former boss, Haman decides to rely on intelligence instead of brute force. He chooses a formation inspired by Roman military tactics and begins teaching the goblins disciplined combat. The first attempts fail miserably. The goblins wander out of position and destroy the formation, so Haman physically arranges them into a straight line. He teaches them to stay close enough to feel the elbows of the soldiers beside them, and demonstrates the correct spear stance, emphasizing balance, positioning, and synchronized attacks. Their first movement lasts barely half a second before one goblin trips. Haman simply puts him back on his feet and starts again. He knows mastery comes through repetition. Just like workers in his former office job had to redo rejected tasks until they improved, these goblins must practice until their mistakes disappear. Formation after formation follows. Gradually, they improve. During one exercise, Haman notices how exhausted they have become. Yet they continue holding the line. Their tired expressions remind him of exhausted employees staying late to redo their work. For the first time, he sees the goblins less as primitive soldiers and more like ordinary workers, except their performance reviews involve spears. Haman immediately becomes serious again. Stopping their training could mean death. The drills continue through the night and into dawn. Despite aching muscles and shaking legs, the goblins keep practicing. Haman introduces a strict rule. Every mistake means 10 additional repetitions for the entire group. If one goblin fails, everyone pays the price. Then a tiny goblin child approaches him. The frightened child reveals the tribe's terrible tradition. Whenever the enemy demanded it, 3 goblin children were sacrificed so the rest of the tribe could survive. The weakest children were chosen, and the child believes repeating the sacrifice might protect Haman too. The cave falls silent. The child clings to Haman's hand through tears, while the other goblins lower their heads in shame. Haman realizes that these goblins have been surviving by sacrificing their own children. He refuses to accept such a life. If they continue giving away their people, eventually nothing will remain. He declares that they will fight together. Their land will not be surrendered. Their people will not be handed over, and not a single child will be sacrificed while he is their lord. His words replace fear with something the goblins have almost forgotten: hope. One by one, they raise their weapons and roar with renewed determination. At that exact moment, the floating system's countdown reaches 0. Territory combat begins. Terrifying war cries echo through the valley as a massive horde of red-eyed goblins charges toward the canyon. Their footsteps shake the ground while clouds of dust rise behind them. Haman's small army remains completely still at the entrance. Standing shoulder to shoulder, he slowly raises his hand. Every goblin raises their spear at the same time. For the first time, their formation is nearly perfect. Their wooden spears form a solid wall across the narrow passage as the enemy closes in. Haman does not retreat. He has prepared the terrain, built traps, and trained his soldiers through the night. Now there is nothing left to prepare. The enemy goblins charge directly toward the battlefield he created for them, unaware that their overwhelming numbers may have become their greatest disadvantage. Haman calmly watches them approach. The real battle is finally about to begin. Invading goblins charge deeper into the narrow canyon, unaware that Haman's trap is directly ahead. Behind it, his exhausted soldiers tighten their grips and hold formation despite their fear. Haman orders them to remain still until the enemy reaches the pit. Finally, the leading goblins spot the enormous hole and desperately try to stop, but the horde behind them keeps charging, crashing into the front ranks and pushing them straight into the pit. The first goblins fall in, followed by countless others. Soon the trap is packed with terrified enemies, pushing, kicking, and climbing over one another. Those farther back continue charging without realizing what happened and plunge into the same pit. The trap fills rapidly, leaving the invading army with almost nowhere to move. Haman then raises his arm. The goblins positioned above the canyon begin pushing the prepared boulders down the cliffs. Massive rocks crash into the trapped enemies, knocking them back into the pit and crushing those who cannot escape. The bottleneck works perfectly. The enemy's overwhelming numbers have become their greatest weakness. However, Heman notices that his own frontline soldiers are exhausted. Their arms shake and their breathing is heavy. Before they can recover, surviving enemies rush toward them. Heman remains calm and reminds his soldiers that discipline is now more important than numbers. The defenders steady their spears and hold their positions. When Heman gives the command, the entire formation advances together. Every enemy reaching the line is met by a wall of spear tips. The goblins pull their weapons back and thrust forward in synchronized attacks, refusing to create any gaps. Step by step, they push the enemy backward toward the pit. Panic spreads through the invaders. One goblin loses its footing near the edge and falls into the trap, causing several others to stumble after it as the crowd behind them pushes forward. Soon, the canyon floor is filled with defeated enemies. Heman lowers his spear. The boulders destroyed the enemy's momentum, while the disciplined spear formation finished the remaining force. Together, the two tactics completely turn the battle. Heman looks at his soldiers and remembers how frightened and disorganized they were only the previous night. Now they have defended their home against an entire invading army. He briefly allows himself to feel relieved. Then the ground begins shaking. A massive shadow emerges through the dust. Heavy footsteps echo through the canyon before a gigantic claw crashes into the ground beside a goblin soldier. Everyone looks upward. A monstrous, muscular creature stands before them, armed with razor-sharp fangs and an enormous bone club. Its roar shakes the canyon and sends loose rocks falling from the cliffs. The creature points its weapon toward Heman and demands a fight to the death before charging forward with shocking speed. When the dust settles, its enormous size becomes clear. It is the enemy lord, a powerful hobgoblin. The hobgoblin looks Heman over, seemingly amused by his ordinary appearance. Heman remains completely calm and instead mocks the monster's terrible breath. Enraged, the hobgoblin proposes a one-on-one duel to decide the war. Heman refuses, showing no interest in fighting according to the monster's rules. The hobgoblin interprets this as fear and mocks him while the enemy goblins laugh. Then Heman raises his hand. A gigantic boulder crashes down from above and smashes into the hobgoblin's head. Before it can recover, another boulder falls. Then another. Soon an entire avalanche of rocks rains down on the monster. The hobgoblin desperately tries to defend itself, but the barrage overwhelms it and eventually buries the massive enemy lord beneath the stones. Silence returns. Heman calmly brushes the dust from his clothes. He has no reason to fight fairly when strategy has already given him the advantage. Winning matters more to him than proving his strength through an honorable duel. The glowing blue system panel then appears. Territory battle complete. Victory belongs to Heman and his goblins. Heman smiles and raises his wooden spear. The goblins erupt into celebration. Cheers fill the cave as exhausted warriors collapse onto the rocky ground, laughing and struggling to catch their breath. After surviving such an impossible battle, their victory feels unreal. Then something moves among the bodies. A blood-covered enemy goblin slowly rises. One of Heman's soldiers immediately presses a spear against its throat, while the others surround the prisoner, ready to kill it. Heman watches quietly before ordering them to stand down. The goblins hesitate but lower their weapons. They cannot understand why he would spare an enemy after everything that happened. Heman asks what they would actually gain by killing the prisoner. One goblin points out that the survivor could eventually return and attack them again. Heman approaches the terrified prisoner and explains the practical value of keeping it alive. A dead enemy is only a corpse. It cannot build walls, carry supplies, or perform labor. A living prisoner can do all three. The goblins finally understand. Heman is not showing mercy. He is turning an enemy into a resource. As afternoon settles over the battlefield, the goblins realize that their new lord thinks very differently from their former leaders. For Heman, even an enemy can become an advantage when used correctly. The afternoon sky turns deep red. The battlefield finally becomes quiet. From the stone altar, Heman surveys his newly expanded territory. More followers surround him. Captured enemies have been added to the population, and the supplies recovered from the battle are stacked nearby. He opens the glowing system panel and discovers that his territory has leveled up. Another 260 captured workers have joined the population, while dried meat, fruit, leather, and other supplies have been added to their stockpile. Most importantly, a new military skill has been unlocked, along with previously hidden information. One detail immediately catches Heman's attention. His territory is located on the 12th floor of this strange realm. Heman realizes that information could become important later. As he walks down the stone steps, he focuses on their next problem. Winning the battle was only the beginning. Keeping their growing population alive will be much harder. More people means more mouths to feed, so Heman decides they should start farming. Unfortunately, the system immediately reveals that normal agriculture is impossible on this floor. While thinking of alternatives, Heman notices a strange, spiky fruit lying nearby. It looks identical to one he has encountered before. He picks it up and questions the captured prisoners about its origin. Nervous and frightened, they confess that they secretly collected the fruits from a massive tree. Haman has already eaten one himself, so he has no reason to punish them. Instead, he selects 3 prisoners and orders them to scout the forest before sunrise and locate the tree. The prisoners immediately become terrified. They reveal that a mysterious guardian supposedly lives inside the forest. Nobody has clearly seen it because those who encounter it never return. Rather than being discouraged, Heman becomes even more interested. When some of his goblins become aggressive toward the prisoners, Heman silences them. He reminds everyone that they won the previous battle through intelligence, not superior strength or weapons. The same principle applies now. Fear and violence will solve nothing. Careful planning will keep them alive. The prisoners are spared, and the scouts prepare for their mission. That night, the 3 scouts enter the dark forest with wooden spears. The unnatural silence makes every sound frightening. When a glowing insect lands on one scout, he nearly panics, but his companion reminds him that their mission is only to observe. They continue deeper into the trees, moving carefully and avoiding unnecessary noise. Then one scout notices something above them. Huge spiky fruits hang from the branches, exactly like the ones they were searching for. But something far more disturbing surrounds them. Enormous glowing webs stretch between the branches, covering the entire tree in shimmering silk. The scouts immediately realize they are in dangerous territory. One scout notices dark puddles on the forest floor and touches one. Fresh blood sticks to his fingers. They realize that something has recently hunted here and decide to retreat. But before they can escape, one glowing strand suddenly tightens and violently pulls a scout into the air. His scream disappears into the darkness. Another thread narrowly misses the second scout, slicing his cheek and leaving him bleeding as he desperately searches for the attacker. The final scout hears something large moving behind the trees. They run. Back at the canyon, the surviving scouts return in panic and collapse from exhaustion. Heman immediately notices that only 2 have come back. The injured scout explains that their companion was dragged into the air. While helping him, Heman notices a glowing strand still attached to his clothing. He removes it and examines its incredible strength. The clues finally connect. The enormous webs, fresh blood, invisible attacks, and missing scout point toward only one possibility. Giant spiders control the forest. Haman asks about the route beyond the forest and learns that it eventually leads to a desert. The goblins initially do not understand the word, so Heman describes it as a place covered in sand. According to their map, reaching it requires crossing a hill, then a river, and finally the dangerous forest. Before Heman can organize the next step, a terrified scream erupts from the camp. The 2 scouts rush back, exhausted and injured. Heman understands that entering the forest blindly would be suicidal. But instead of backing down, he removes his jacket and accepts the challenge personally. He orders the goblins to prepare their equipment. They are going into the forest. Heman throws his jacket over his shoulder and treats the dangerous mission like another overtime assignment. The goblins tighten their grips on their weapons and follow him. Soon they reach the forest's edge. Towering trees disappear into darkness, completely covered in glowing webs. The silk stretches between the branches, forming eerie tunnels that block much of the light. The forest feels as though something is waiting for them. Then, without warning, a gigantic fang pierces the arm of one goblin. The warrior cries out as something violently pulls him backward. A massive spider drops from the shadows, its glowing eyes and enormous fangs terrifying the defenders. It races across the web at incredible speed, dragging the wounded goblin away and preparing to claim another victim. Meanwhile, along another trail, Heman carefully leads the remaining goblins through the forest. Everyone stays silent, nervously watching the treetops for spiders. When they finally reach the forest's edge, there is still no sign of the creatures. The unnatural silence worries Heman. Behind him, a hungry goblin secretly chews on a piece of old leather, but another immediately stops him. Heman notices and realizes their food supplies are nearly gone. Leather might suppress hunger temporarily, but starvation will soon become a serious problem. Heman then examines the enormous spider webs surrounding the forest. He grabs a strand and tries to break it, only to discover that the magical silk is far stronger than ordinary rope. While he struggles with it, The little goblin wearing a red scarf quietly wanders away. Haman catches him and sends him back, ordering the others to keep watch over the young troublemaker. Suddenly, lightning tears across the sky, followed by thunder and heavy rain. A violent storm quickly covers the demon realm. Haman leads everyone into a nearby cave to escape the downpour. Inside, he notices something strange about the webs outside. He holds a strand beneath the rain, and the magical silk immediately begins weakening and dissolving. Water clearly affects the webs. Although even weakened, they remain extremely tough. Haman checks that everyone is safely inside. The goblins confirm that they are all present, until one frightened goblin reveals that someone is missing. Haman counts them and realizes the red-scarfed child has disappeared again. Although he considers sending several goblins to search, Haman rejects the idea because doing so could create even more victims. Believing the child has not gone far, he takes a wooden spear and heads outside alone. Despite the others trying to stop him, Haman orders everyone to remain inside and steps into the storm. Following small footprints in the muddy ground, Haman moves deeper into the forest. Another lightning strike illuminates the trees, and soon he notices an unusual orange glow. As he approaches, burning embers appear across the soaked ground. Haman's stomach drops when he discovers the missing goblin trapped in flames. The child is crying and desperately rolling through the mud as fire burns his body. Haman immediately rushes in, grabs him, and pulls him away. The frightened goblin accidentally strikes Haman in the face, but Haman ignores it and pushes the burning part of the child's body into a muddy puddle, extinguishing the flames. The exhausted child collapses, crying over his badly singed tail. Haman is frustrated by his recklessness, but soon learns the reason for his disappearance. The child's younger brother is starving and constantly begging for the strange fruits. Unable to hear his brother crying anymore, the child had secretly entered the forest to find food. Haman understands his desperation, but the situation also makes him reconsider everything he has witnessed. The strange fruits, spiders, magical webs, the storm, and now fire. He realizes that despite everything he has seen in the demon realm, he has never encountered real fire before. An idea forms. Haman removes his soaked suit jacket, tears a strip from his shirt, and prepares to test his theory. Back at the cave, the goblins grow increasingly worried because their lord has been gone too long. Eventually, they decide they cannot leave him alone and rush into the storm with their weapons. Soon, an enormous orange glow appears ahead. The goblins stop in shock. A gigantic wall of fire towers over the forest, consuming vegetation and lighting the darkness like daylight. The goblins have never seen anything like it. The heat overwhelms one small warrior, causing him to collapse to his knees. To them, fire is more than dangerous. It is completely unknown, almost divine. Then Haman emerges from the darkness, holding a blazing torch above his head. To the goblins, he looks like a divine being carrying the sun through the demon realm. Their fear breaks when they realize he is alive, and they rush toward him in relief. Haman is surprised that they ignored his order to stay inside, but their arrival proves useful. He pulls out a piece of the incredibly durable spider web and holds it against the torch. The web instantly crackles and burns away. Haman's theory is correct. Fire is the key to destroying the magical spider webs. He then looks at the red-scarfed child. His reckless decision had accidentally led to this important discovery, so Haman decides to reward him with something special. He gives the child a proper name, Kim Prometheus, shortened to Kimro. The system immediately reacts. A glowing blue window confirms that a citizen has received a name. Golden light surrounds Kimro as magical energy swirls around his body. His yellow eyes shine brighter, and his body slowly rises into the air. Every goblin watches silently as the naming process triggers a complete evolution. After several moments, the golden light disappears, and Kimro gently returns to the ground. Haman carefully studies the newly evolved goblin, while the others immediately celebrate and chant Kimro's name throughout the forest. The celebration continues until Haman raises his hand. Everyone becomes silent. The battle is not over. The spiders still control the forest, and their webs remain the greatest obstacle. Haman gathers everyone and distributes burning torches among the soldiers. The flames illuminate their faces as their confidence returns. The spiders had dominated the forest because their webs made them nearly untouchable. Now Haman knows their weakness. Fire. With torches in every goblin's hands, the balance has finally shifted. Haman grips his own torch and leads the goblins deeper into the forest. This time, they are not entering the spiders' territory helplessly. They are carrying the one weapon the monsters cannot withstand. Haman moves deeper into the spider-infested forest, with a burning torch in his hand. Every goblin follows close behind, each carrying a flaming torch of their own. The rain continues pouring around them as Haman examines the strange web-covered territory. Massive cocoons hang from the trees in every direction. Then he spots one that contains a captured goblin. Without hesitation, Haman sets the cocoon on fire. Kimro watches the flames nervously, nearly breaking down at the sight. Haman studies the burning cocoon and realizes that anyone trapped inside for this long is unlikely to have survived. Then something catches his attention. A giant spider is nearby. Before Haman can react, a strange sound echoes through the forest. He turns toward it and comes face to face with the spider monster. Haman immediately raises his torch. The spider reacts instantly. Instead of attacking, it leaps high into the trees and retreats from the flames. Haman's suspicion is confirmed. The spiders are cold-blooded creatures, and fire is something they instinctively fear. For a moment, Haman considers the most obvious solution. If fire can drive the spiders away, burning the entire forest could force every creature out. But destroying the forest would also destroy their only food supply. That option is too costly. Instead, Haman focuses on the fleeing spiders. The monsters quickly retreat through the trees using their webs. Haman throws his torch toward one of them, attempting to set it ablaze. The goblins hesitate, unsure what their leader intends to do. Haman realizes that waiting will only give the spiders more time to escape. He decides to attack first. With a powerful leap, he closes the distance between himself and one of the creatures. His wooden spear drives straight into the spider's abdomen. The monster dies instantly. The goblins stare in complete disbelief. Their lord has just killed one of the terrifying creatures that had controlled the entire forest. Haman raises his burning torch and realizes that the spiders are no longer as frightening as they seemed. As long as they have fire, the creatures can be killed. He orders the goblins to attack every spider around them. The soldiers immediately charge forward with renewed confidence. The battle erupts throughout the forest. Torches burn through the spiders' webs, while wooden spears finish off the creatures that try to escape. One spider after another falls. Even Kimro manages to defeat a spider himself. The little goblin is overwhelmed with pride and excitement, desperate to prove himself to Haman. For a moment, everything seems to be going perfectly. Then Kimro notices something disturbing. The spiders surrounding Haman are no longer attacking individually. They are spreading their webs together. The creatures are coordinating their movements. Haman realizes the danger a moment too late. He never expected the spiders to be intelligent enough to launch a coordinated attack. Before he can respond, one of the webs catches his torch and knocks it from his hand. Another wave of sticky silk immediately wraps around his body. Within seconds, nearly half of Haman is completely bound. The spiders pull him into the air and begin dragging him deeper into the forest. The goblins can only watch helplessly as their leader disappears between the trees. Haman struggles against the webbing, but his thoughts are already focused on the consequences. If he dies here, his territory will collapse. The goblins will lose their leader, their food supply, and their protection. Without him, the entire territory could eventually become nothing more than a spider nest, with every goblin slowly dying from starvation. The danger has returned, and this time Haman is the one trapped. Then Kimro screams in desperation. Tears stream down his face as he rushes toward his captured lord. Several goblins try to stop him, but Kimro refuses to slow down. He continues charging directly toward Haman. A giant spider launches another web at him. Kimro keeps moving. Just before the web reaches him, memories of Haman flash through his mind. He remembers how his lord protected him, cared for him, and gave him a name when he had never possessed one before. Something suddenly awakens inside Kimro. A powerful energy erupts from deep within his body. The system responds to the bond created through naming. A new ability activates. The protection of flame takes effect. Kimro's entire body suddenly bursts into fire. The tiny goblin becomes completely surrounded by blazing flames. His transformation is so dramatic that he resembles a miniature flame warrior. Kimro digs his feet into the ground and launches himself into the air. Blazing wings spread behind him as he flies toward the cocoon containing Haman. Tears continue streaming down his face, but he refuses to stop. He pours all of his newly awakened power into the rescue. The moment Kimro's flames touch the spider web, the cocoon begins hissing. The thick silk rapidly melts away. Within seconds, the web completely dissolves. Haman falls free. He stares in stunned disbelief as Kimro lands gently on his arm. The tiny goblin looks up at him with determined eyes, relieved that his lord is finally safe. But the rescue comes with one immediate problem. Kimro is still covered in flames. Heat spreads across Heyman's body as the fire begins licking at his clothes. Heyman quickly warns the little goblin to keep his distance before the flames accidentally burn him as well. Kimro carefully moves away while the fire continues blazing around his small body. Heyman can hardly believe what he has witnessed. The little goblin, who was once terrified of everything, has awakened a powerful flame ability, and now the weakest member of the group has become the one who saved their lord from certain death. Meanwhile, Heyman carefully guides the rest of the goblins deeper through the forest. With everyone staying as quiet as possible, the scouts remain tense, constantly checking the surrounding trees for another spider ambush. Eventually, they reach the edge of the forest, but there is no sign of the spiders. The silence feels more unsettling than an attack would have. While Heyman studies the treetops, one starving goblin secretly starts chewing on a piece of old leather. Another immediately stops him, reminding him that leather is not food. Heyman watches the situation with concern. Their food supplies are already running dangerously low, and simply rationing what little they have will not solve the problem. His attention returns to the enormous spider webs. He grabs one of the strands and tries to tear through it, only to discover that the material is incredibly tough. Even chewing on it proves useless. The web is practically indestructible. Nearby, the small goblin wearing the red scarf quietly sneaks away from the group. Heyman notices and immediately calls him back. The little goblin freezes before reluctantly returning to the others. Heyman makes sure the rest of the group keeps an eye on the troublemaker, so he does not wander off and get himself killed. Just then, lightning tears across the sky. Thunder follows almost immediately, and dark clouds rapidly cover the entire realm. Heavy rain begins hammering the ground, quickly turning the forest into a stormy mess. Heyman leads everyone into a nearby cave for shelter. While the goblins huddle together, he watches the rain falling over the spider webs outside. Something about the storm catches his attention. He grabs a strand of web and holds it beneath the rain. Almost immediately, the material begins weakening and dissolving. Water clearly affects the spider silk. Unfortunately, even after being weakened, the web remains too tough to tear apart easily. Heyman decides that the best option is to wait until the storm becomes stronger. But while everyone is gathered inside the cave, a frightening discovery is made. One goblin is missing. Heyman quickly counts the group and realizes exactly who has disappeared. The little goblin with the red scarf has wandered into the forest. For a moment, Heyman considers sending several goblins after him. He quickly rejects the idea. Sending more people into the spider-infested forest would only create more casualties. Instead, he grabs one of the wooden spears left behind by the scouts and prepares to search alone. The others desperately try to stop him, but Heyman orders them to remain inside and protect the territory. He steps into the storm by himself. Rain pours over his clothes as he moves through the dark forest. Despite the terrifying surroundings, Heyman continues forward. As the leader, he knows that when one of his people is in danger, he cannot simply sit safely inside the cave. Soon he notices tiny footprints preserved in the wet mud. The tracks belong to the missing goblin and lead deeper into the forest. Heyman follows them through the rain. Lightning flashes overhead, making the already frightening forest even more dangerous. Then he notices an unusual orange glow between the trees. He rushes toward it and discovers the missing goblin trapped in the middle of a spreading fire. The little guy is rolling around desperately because part of his body has caught fire. Heyman immediately charges through the flames and grabs him. Ignoring the heat, he drags the child away and pushes the burning part into a muddy puddle, quickly extinguishing it. Once the danger passes, the frightened goblin explains why he ran away. His younger brother has been constantly suffering from hunger and desperately wanted the strange fruits growing in the forest. Unable to watch him suffer anymore, the little goblin had secretly gone searching for food. Heyman understands the reason behind his actions, but makes it clear that risking his life was not the solution. Then something clicks in Heyman's mind. Since arriving in the demon realm, he cannot remember seeing ordinary fire anywhere. That realization gives him an idea. He removes his soaked jacket and tears a strip of fabric from his shirt. With a slow grin, Heyman prepares to test his theory. Back at the cave, the remaining goblins grow increasingly worried. Their lord has been gone too long. Eventually, they decide they cannot simply wait while he risks his life alone. The goblins rush into the storm to search for him. After moving through the rain, they suddenly see an enormous orange glow ahead. A massive wall of fire has appeared in the forest, illuminating the darkness like daylight. The goblins are completely stunned. None of them has ever witnessed fire before, so the flames appear almost divine. Then Heinemann emerges from the darkness carrying a blazing torch. To the goblins, the sight is almost legendary. Their exhausted and ordinary-looking lord now appears like a powerful figure carrying the sun itself. The goblins rush toward him in relief, only for Heinemann to realize that they ignored his order to stay inside. Still, their arrival gives him the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his discovery. He takes a piece of the incredibly tough spider web and holds it against the torch. The moment the web touches the flame, it burns and disintegrates. The goblins erupt in excitement. The material they believed was impossible to destroy can be defeated by fire. Heinemann realizes that the runaway goblin's actions accidentally helped him discover the spider's greatest weakness. He then decides to reward the little goblin by giving him a proper name. The system immediately recognizes the naming process and activates its special effect. Golden light surrounds the small goblin as magical energy floods through his body. His new name appears above him, while his eyes begin glowing with a strange power. The little goblin suddenly rises from the ground as the energy transforms him. A few moments later, the golden light disappears, leaving him safely standing on the forest floor. Heinemann is stunned by the unexpected evolution. The other goblins, however, immediately celebrate their newly named companion, repeatedly cheering his new name. After allowing them a moment to celebrate, Heinemann regains everyone's attention. The spiders are still out there, and the danger has not disappeared. He begins distributing burning torches to the goblins, with flames illuminating their faces. Heinemann prepares to turn the spiders' greatest advantage into their biggest weakness. The spider tribe had controlled the forest through their nearly indestructible webs. Now Heinemann and his goblins have fire, and they are finally ready to take the fight back to them. Short while later, the entire section of forest has been consumed by flames. Heinemann burns away almost everything, leaving only blackened ground and scattered ash. His goal is to remove the spider's greatest advantage, the trees they use to hide and attack from unexpected angles, and create a safer zone for harvesting the mysterious fruits. He also plans to build a watchtower, so approaching enemies can be spotted early enough to evacuate. As Heinemann studies the burning forest, a goblin approaches carrying a massive sack of fruit. One fruit falls directly in front of him. Assuming the goblin has come to help clear the forest, Heinemann asks whether he is ready to participate. Instead, the goblin drops the sack, spilling fruit everywhere, and begins crying while desperately begging for forgiveness. The other goblins behind him are equally terrified. Some cry, while others offer their gathered food and bow before Heinemann. A frightened female goblin even offers herself in exchange for the safety of her children. Completely baffled, Heinemann angrily tries to explain that he never intended to hurt them. He then notices some freshly gathered fruit dangerously close to the flames, and finally understands. The goblins believed he planned to destroy their food supply as punishment. Once the misunderstanding is cleared up, Heinemann explains that the fire is meant to protect their territory, not destroy their food. By nightfall, the trees and branches are gone, leaving a huge open space with a newly constructed wooden watchtower in the center. A goblin is assigned as lookout, providing an early warning system. Heinemann later walks away with Kimro and the newly adopted wolf pup. Kimro admires Heinemann's achievements, while the cheerful wolf soon starts another small argument with Kimro. Heinemann ignores them and examines the enormous fruit in his hand. Although their food supply is now more stable, Heinemann realizes their problems are not over. Around 260 goblins live in the territory, and at their current harvesting rate, the nearby fruit could be exhausted within 6 months. If it takes longer to regenerate, starvation, and another major crisis could follow. They need a sustainable way to manage their resources. That night, Heinemann sits beside the fire with Kimro and the wolf, while drawing a rough map. Their next goal is to explore toward the river and the desert the goblins previously mentioned. Since the region is largely unknown, he wants to prepare carefully before sending everyone into danger. Heinemann also considers their biggest combat weakness. Goblins are small and physically weaker than many monsters, so a long-range weapon could compensate for their disadvantage. Then he notices spider web stuck to the wolf's fur. When he pulls it free, the strand sticks to his fingers. He stretches it and discovers incredible elasticity. It suddenly snaps back, striking the wolf and making it yelp. As Heinemann checks on it, another strand falls from its body. This web is still sticky but less adhesive. Heinemann warms it carefully near the fire without burning it, and discovers that it remains extremely elastic while losing much of its stickiness. Heinemann immediately gets an idea, a slingshot. He experiments with the dried spider web, tying it between his fingers and stretching it like an elastic band. It works. A few days later, Heinemann gathers all the goblins inside the cave and reveals his new weapon. Some mistake it for food, while others gossip about the strange material. Heinemann demonstrates by having Kimro throw food into the air. He pulls back the spiderweb sling, aims and releases. The projectile destroys the airborne food instantly. The stunned goblins realize that this simple weapon allows them to attack enemies from a distance and fight stronger monsters without relying completely on close combat. With their weapons ready, Heinemann decides it is time to leave their territory and explore new land. The goblins are nervous after their terrifying battle with the spiders, but Heinemann reminds them how badly they once lived. They were starving, terrified, and even forced to sacrifice their children. Now they have food, a defended territory, weapons, and most importantly, each other. Heinemann explains that this expedition will not be another mission where everyone hides behind their lord. They will move forward together and build their future together. Heinemann asks for volunteers, determined to ensure that no goblin under his rule ever starves again. For several moments, nobody moves as they remember everything they have endured. Then one goblin raises a hand, followed by another. Soon, every goblin volunteers. Heinemann looks across the crowd with a confident smile. For the first time, his people are no longer merely surviving. They are ready to explore, fight, and build a future together.